we wanted to cover some of the policies and procedures that you should consider implementing to protect against these claims. First one, we believe, is the meal and rest break attestations. Now, this was approved by the Donahue Court in 2021. There were two issues before the court. First, the court decided that you could not round off time punches in the context of meal periods. And second issue, which is important here, is that when there are time records showing non-compliant meal periods, that raises a rebuttable presumption of meal period violations. And the burden shifts on the employer whose payroll records show the non-compliant breaks. The court held that the employers may use the attestations in that context as evident of compliant breaks. Next slide. The next issue that we are seeing that are being alleged more and more in PAGA and class actions are expense reimbursement claims. So the law essentially requires employers must reimburse employees for all necessary expenses. The statute is interpreted very broadly by the courts. California law and public policy favor protecting employees from an employer passing any operating costs to the employees. So remember, reimbursement is always required. Next slide. Some of the necessary work-related expenses may include, but are not limited to, the use of employees' personal vehicle for work purposes, business travel, tools and equipment the employee may use to perform the job, use of the employee's personal cell phone for work reasons, required uniform purchase and maintenance, and employees who work from home may request reimbursement expenses for office supplies, internet access, and required equipment cost. Now, a big issue that we are starting to see more and more is the claim for cell phone reimbursement. Now, an employer is required to reimburse employees for the required use of their personal cell phone for work-related reasons. This includes where they received calls, made calls, sending messages, voicemails, or messages via messaging apps, which are usually used by employees for group messaging. Now, reimbursement is required even if the employee did not incur an extra expense by using their cell phone because they happen to have an unlimited data plan. Now, courts have stated that that does not mean that you as an employer are now not required to reimburse an employee. Reimbursement is always required. So how do you determine what is the amount of reimbursement? The employer must pay what's called the reasonable percentage of the employee's cell phone charge. So generally 20%, 75%, but there's no guidance. So some of the things that employers can consider is the actual expense that the employee incurred and whether those expenses were necessary. However, if the employee is getting calls, messages, voicemails from supervisors or managers that is not based on the employee's choice, the necessary standard does not apply. Employer is required to use some discretion in determining the amount of reimbursement, but the standard is still reasonable reimbursement, which means that employers should just be careful in this area and make sure that your reasonable standard is going to, what you think is reasonable is going to pass a court's test. Next slide. Recommendations in what percentage you should reimburse for cell phones. You can use a flat monthly stipend based on what you believe is the estimated cost of the usage. You can also establish different reimbursements for different positions based on the amount of usage. And you may have an employee whose job depends on the phone and may use more of their cell phone more often versus somebody who rarely is going to use their cell phone.